Hi, welcome back, biology classes. Today we're starting off biodiversity and humans' roles in conservation and why we care about biodiversity. So before we really start talking about what people do with biodiversity and how we preserve nature and stuff, the first thing we want to talk about is what is biodiversity. As a result, we're going to go over some new vocab, a little bit about why we care about each, and then some general biodiversity and its value to us. So there's three main types of biodiversity. There's genetic diversity, there's species diversity, and there's ecosystem diversity. Each of these is the diversity of whatever that first word is. So genetic diversity is the amount of diversity in the genes or in the genetic combinations and possible thereof inside any given population. That could be the genetic diversity in a town, in a country, across the globe. It could be the genetic diversity of the trees in this forest or the genetic diversity of the trees in this whole biome. How you decide your population will depend on your genetic diversity. Species diversity is the diversity or the variation of species in a given location. And ecosystem diversity is the amount of different ecosystems in the globe. More in-depth information about genetic diversity and our genetic variation in a population, like I mentioned earlier. Genetic variation sounds like it might not be very much at all, but what we're really looking at here is, like if we look down at these carrots down here, we can see a lot of genetic variation. This is all one type of carrot. This isn't even many types of carrot. You have just this genetic variation. Now, we normally just see carrots like this one here, or maybe this one here, or this one in our supermarkets, because those are so selectively bred to only have a small genetic variation in the crops. But in the wild, you can find carrots that look like this, or that have all these offshoots, or are very short and fat. And these are all the same type of carrot. Corn's a very interesting example as well, because each kernel is a seed. That means that the genetic makeup of each kernel of corn is different. And so in this single ear of corn, you see all that genetic diversity. If you look at that one ear as the population, right? You have the yellow types, the orange types, the blue types. Is that green types? Black types, white types. But if we take all 5 of these ears of corn, all the same species of corn, you can see a wide variety of different genetics, even from ear to ear. Likewise in dogs, and this genetic variation is largely artificial. It's caused by humans. You know, we bred dogs to look like this German Shepherd and to look like this, I think that's a Schnauzer, and everything across that board. And so we've been playing with the variation that is of dogs. Another example that I like to use is people and genetic diversity in people, which we see over here. In a small town where people don't really leave or come into or out of very often, you might get a lot of people with very similar genetics, right? Like all the people in Ireland, not a small town, but a relatively closed segment of the world for a very long time. And so you saw this lesser genetic variation. People start looking very similar to each other. Whereas if you look at a city like New York or Bogota, where people are right, where people keep coming in from all these different places, you get all these different types of people with all their different ethnic backgrounds, cultural backgrounds, and genetic backgrounds. And so there's a much higher level of genetic diversity in those locations. Genetic diversity, while not talked about frequently, is important because that's where your adaptations and your fitness comes from when we talk about evolution. It's the strengths that come from the differences. If everything was the same, then one disease could kill everything. If everything is the same, then a change in temperature might kill everything. If everything's the same, then they can all be taken out by the same thing. But by having a wide variation in the genetics, you have a better chance of some of them being able to deal with whatever new problem or situation comes their way. So we get a lot of strength and a lot more resilience with a higher genetic diversity. Species diversity is your classic biodiversity. When people talk about biodiversity, they're normally talking about species diversity, if they're not being specific. And that, of course, is the amount of different species in a location, right? We see in this coral reef picture, oodles of fish, like just different types of fish, huge amounts of biodiversity in a coral reef, which we know, right? And you could spend an hour just counting the different species in this one picture here. Likewise, right below it, we have some prairies, some North American grasslands, and we can see in here we think of grasslands as being less biodiverse, but we got red flowers, white flowers, purple flowers, different purple flowers, tall flowers, different yellow flowers, not to mention all the grasses that aren't flowering currently, some woody plants in the background, some ferns. There's a lot going on in there. There's a lot of biodiversity, and again, not to mention all the different insects that we can't even see. The number of different species is it's called absolute diversity. Relative abundance, however, is also important. When we look at this picture down here, it's very obvious that community 1 has a higher level of diversity than community 2. But if you just count the different species, they each only have 4 different species, tree A, tree B, tree C, and tree D. The difference between community 1 and community 2 is that in community 2, you see 80% tree A. You see a lot and a lot and a lot and a lot of tree A. So the amount of diversity, even though the total number of species is the same, you see less of them, which makes it less diverse. Whereas in community 1 over here, they're spread out equally, so it looks like all this more variety, and there is more variety. So when we talk about biodiversity, we also have to talk about relative abundance, not just total differences, not just this idea that, oh, there are many different types, therefore very diverse. It's there's many different types, and even the uncommon ones are showing up more commonly, right? Finally, we get to ecosystem diversity, which is normally used as a measure of global health. And it's how many different ecosystems exist and how frequently. And we can see that down here in this picture. This is our amount of different ecosystems. It looks like if I use the key, it goes up to 32 different ecosystems and how commonly and frequently they show up across the world. Pretty cool. There's a lot of them. And you see in a lot of places those colors vary widely. We get like these dark greens that show up in many places, but they're always clearly tropical, and some deserts, and our taiga, our tundras, and our boreal forests are all up here, things like that, right? We lose ecosystem diversity with things like climate change, pollution, habitat loss, deforestation, which is habitat loss, and other forms of industrialization. Over here, we see an image of which ecosystems are most sensitive. 100% being assured to see change and 0% being probably won't change at all. The only places where we don't see any change at all is, oh look, the Saharan desert, and these places that are like rocks, just barren rocks. And again, oh look, more desert. These desert areas are the ones that are less likely to be damaged or high in the mountains, very high. But your boreal forests and your grasslands, things like that, those moderate zones have high levels of sensitivity. They're very easy to be damaged by stuff like climate change. And seeing that damage helps us realize that, hey, we're losing this ecosystem diversity. Which brings us to the point of, well, why do we care if we're losing biodiversity, be it genetic or ecosystem or species diversity? Why do people care, especially when some people argue that technology can do anything that nature can do? I think it's a poor argument, but even if it can, why do we care about biodiversity? Namely, people make a lot of money on it. Nature and the products of nature are direct items of commerce. We sell things that found in nature for food, clothing, energy, medicine, building materials. All of these things come from nature. More biodiversity means healthier ecosystems, means more replenishment of those resources. Not to mention the opportunity to find new and different ways to be making money off of them. That's particularly species diversity. When we talk about ecosystem diversity or genetic diversity, having that genetic diversity gives us a safety net for the things we already have. Right? We're growing all this corn, all this wheat, all this soy, canola, whatever. If a disease comes in and hits these very, very select variations of the genes that we're currently growing and start wiping out the corn population, we need to go and look in some of the older varieties of corn and different varieties of corn to find the genes that will allow it to be resistant to that disease. Without genetic variation, we can't do that. And when we talk about ecosystem diversity and we talk about species diversity, a lot of the chemicals that we use in industrial processes were originally found in nature. If those wide variety of compounds weren't there because they were destroyed, we never would have been able to find them. And by protecting that biodiversity that we have now, we're essentially protecting future advancements in medicine and construction. Indirect economic value is probably one of the ones that's the most forgotten, which is a shame because it's probably the most useful. Healthy ecosystems give services to people without people doing anything but letting them do it. And while we could do most of these on our own, the cost to do it would be worldwide bankruptcy. There's no way that humans could synthesize enough oxygen for a healthy breathing and atmosphere in a lab. The cost would be exorbitant. No country could do it. No town could do it. No, it couldn't be done. It would stop all other commerce because oxygen would take all of our money and resources. Likewise, bringing in carbon dioxide, creating clean drinking water. Wars are being fought over drinking water because the ecosystems that used to clean that water and provide it are being destroyed through industrialization and climate change. Fertilizing our soil, which gives us all of our food and things like that from agriculture, as we've depleted them, we have to start putting money into it, and that makes farming less profitable. But if we have a healthy ecosystem surrounding those crops and we're maintaining them and we're doing good conservation practices, we save that money. Likewise, decomposing waste and detoxifying chemicals, if the chemicals don't kill an ecosystem, they'll be able to eventually remove them and clean them. Healthy ecosystems do a lot. And people take it for granted until it's gone, and all of a sudden, New Orleans is flooding and Houston is flooding because we've destroyed the wetlands in those areas, and there's no way for that to be there. And we spend billions of dollars in reconstruction and damage control, whereas if we just didn't destroy the swamps, we would have saved all of that money. So indirect economic value is huge and overlooked until it's gone. Finally, we get aesthetic and scientific value. These are hard to talk about because they're intangible, right? When we talk about value, we like converting it to dollars because we understand what the value of a dollar is, more or less. And beauty and the potential outcome of future discoveries is hard to put a price tag on that, right? When people think about vacations and when they think about, relaxing and getting away from it all and peace of mind, they think about nature and they think about what that gives, right? People everywhere will pay more for an apartment with a nice view. And it's just because of that beauty, and they know that beauty enhances their life. And when I try to value beauty, I think about it in words and values of memories. I think about all my memories in nature, and how much would someone have to pay me to lose that forever? And I don't think you could pay me enough to lose all my memories of nature. I mean, different people might value it differently, but that's also why it's hard to quantify. But it's there. And when we talk about scientific value, these are the ideas that, we might learn some new mechanical method by studying animals. We might find a new material for building. We might find that new medicine compound. And what are the potential economic impacts of that? Oh, it's huge. And how many potential things might we find in a given area is completely unknown. But by destroying it, we know that value drops down to zero. So those are worth remembering, even though they're harder to talk about. It's also worth remembering that direct economic value, indirect economic value, aesthetic and scientific values are all connected. It's not like aesthetic value isn't making someone a direct economic value. That's the whole world of ecotourism and paintings of these images and photography that captures nature beauty and stuff like that. People pay money to go and see biodiversity. That's direct economic value for someone. Additionally, the happiness and the peace of mind that those sort of experience gives us keeps us happy and healthy. And loss of health and loss of mental stability costs money, so there's an direct economic value to that. Finally, we talked about that potential science and what that could mean for us, and how finding new genes could keep whole economies of agriculture working, and could find new cures. Those are scientific knowledge. And after we have them, incorporating those genes or synthesizing those compounds from nature, all of that scientific process. So they're connected. They're not easily isolated, though they're kind of like a big Venn diagram, if you will. And that kind of sums up the three types of biodiversity, why we care about each of them, and how we discuss those values. I encourage you to check the questions and comments and forums on our TED Ed. I'll see you all in class.